And recording. And Shane hides from the camera.
Have you seen my baseball?
And of course, the cameraman. Hi.
The faceless cameraman.
Faceless cameraman.
Oh, good afternoon, or should I say evening. Can you imagine not being able to get a thought out of your mind? A memory, something terrible that it's so vivid that you feel like you're reliving it every time you have it. Well, soldiers come back from war have that problem. But did you realize that soldiers are not the only ones that can have PTSD? Civilians can too. The diagnosis of PTSD appeared in 1980 for the first time, but doctors, poets, and novelists have written about it for years. And the first documented PTSD case was of an uninjured Athenian soldier in about 490 BC. And he witnessed his comrade's death on the battlefield and developed a case of hysterical blindness. Now, centuries later in World War II, another soldier by the name of Adolf Hitler also became temporarily blind during combat. Hitler was so humiliated by this that when he became dictator, they banned the word shell shock and forbade giving any psychiatric diagnosis to Nazi soldiers. Even high-ranking trained people who carefully screen before being assigned to dangerous duties can come up with PTSD. Now, PTSD isn't limited to just soldiers. It can develop among civilians of all ages and backgrounds, including those with no history of mental illness. Now, PTSD can strike anytime, anywhere, anyone. It doesn't matter what type of work you do. It doesn't matter who you are or what your income is. It has no discrimination on who you are. Now, after 9/11 or 9/11, the Twin Towers incident, PTSD was seen in mass. Thousands of people were reporting the symptoms of being diagnosed with this disorder. Looking at the symptoms, we find the following. If your reaction to a traumatic event persists for a period of time that occurs at least 6 months after the event, you may have developed PTSD. Now, the following is a list of symptoms from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, and they're affiliated with the American Psychiatric Institute. Now, if you've been exposed to a traumatic event in which the following were present, you might have PTSD. You experienced, witnessed, or were confronted with events or an event that involved actual or threatened death or serious injury, or a threat to the physical integrity of yourself or others. So it means if you witness a family member or yourself, you might have PTSD. Your response involved is intense fear, helplessness, or horror, and your perception of the event led to this kind of emotion. So if you were fearful, wanted to hide, run, these sorts of things. When you re-experience this event, when one of the following can happen, you have recurrent, intrusive, distressing recollections of the event, what's also known as flashbacks. It includes images, thoughts, and perceptions, taste, smell, sight, sound, anything. You have reoccurring dreams that distress you. Some people call them night terrors. You act or feel as if the traumatic event were re-happening. So, like, you see these extreme cases where you'll see a soldier come back from war, and every time he hears a loud thump on the ground, he'll end up running for a foxhole. And it's because he's reliving that image of what happened when that thump happened when he was in the war. Now, you can have hallucinations, illusions, and delusions, all with PTSD. So it's a combination of all of this. It's all intensive. Now, intense psychological distress or bodily reactions when you're exposed to external cues can also happen. Like if your body tends to get cold when something happens, that's a reaction to that PTSD would be linked with. So when I have someone who comes up behind me and touches me on the shoulder, I end up getting ice cold, and that's a reaction for me. You persistently avoid triggers, anything that might set you off, a sight, a sound, a noise, a place. I can't go to the mall. I'm a PTSD victim myself, and I can't go to the mall because I feel that I'm too open to be attacked by my ex. So he might show up at the mall and I would have no protection. I would have no way. Even though there's hundreds of people around, I might not be able to get away. So this is also associated. Now, if you make great efforts to avoid thoughts or feelings or situations, you also might be associated with a PTSD event. You can't recall an important aspect of what happened during the trauma. This is also a symptom. Your interest in participating in life in general is waned. You don't want to do anything. You want to be more reclusive. Things you used to do and love, you don't do anymore. You feel detached from everything, like you're walking around in somebody else's body, that it's not really you, or that you're just kind of guiding this body around and you're someplace else. Your ability to feel emotions like love or hate or even liking something kind of becomes very numb and dulled. You're unable to have intense feelings, like having a loving relationship. You can't sense the future. You feel like there is no future past tomorrow. You can't imagine what life would be like 10 years from now, or that I would be married, or that you would have children. These things are all symptomatic of the PTSD. Also, you end up having things such as difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep, irritable outbursts of anger that you normally wouldn't have, your difficulty in concentrating, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle where you're jumpy all the time if anything happens. All these lasting 6 months or more, or starting 6 months or more after the event, are significant to being part of PTSD. Now, with these in mind, you can see that anybody can get this disorder. I believe the general public doesn't know or doesn't realize to the extent that normal people can have this disorder as well. Soldiers have it more often. The federal government has treatment for it, but the people who are on the front lines of, say, a devastating tornado or a hurricane or Katrina even, wiping out a whole city, there are hundreds of cases of PTSD from that. And people don't realize this. Any traumatic event can set PTSD in motion. You have to be aware of the misconceptions that PTSD is. Just because you don't see a cast on an arm or a missing leg or something on the outside doesn't mean that people aren't fighting with this on the inside. Soldiers are more apt to show it because they're more publicly, the media makes a big thing about soldiers coming home with PTSD, and the government makes a big thing about it, and they put up their treatment and everything. Well, the civilians aren't treated the same way. In my own case, I was beaten, raped, tortured, and poisoned. And I think the thing that was the worst of all that triggered it was the fact that it wasn't only me. There was my dog Ginger as well. And so between the two events, and then being a 911 operator, I found that the PTSD developed. Now, what I'd like to say is that not only victims of abuse, but victims of tragedies can all develop. And it can take the smallest thing or it can take the largest thing. But it can happen. And we need to get people to understand that it's not just a soldier's disorder. So when you see somebody or you meet somebody by chance, you never know if they have PTSD or not until they tell you. And so when you go out and you talk to people and you hear somebody say, well, PTSD, the soldiers, stop them and explain to them and tell them that, no, this is everybody. This is something that all of us deal with. And bring to light 911. Bring to light the fact that these things can happen. Bring to light that we are all the same, whether you're a soldier or a person that is a civilian. It can all happen. I thank you for being able to talk to you today about this, and I hope you'll take some action and help people who are in this situation. You have a great afternoon, and thanks again. And I only went a minute over, right?
So what was the duration
Yep.
of this?
It was supposed to be 10 max, but